All right, welcome to our 2 o'clock panel, where I'm bringing in some alumni to talk about their experiences a bit, and we're gonna revisit their time for those that were leadership, being Kevin and Zach, and then talk about current kind of renaissance with Anita, who's currently active. And I apologize for this, but Kevin, there's something vibrating on your microphone now.
Crazy.
So
Phone test.
I'm gonna mute you for a second, and then I'll unmute you once I come back to you, so we can keep moving. All right, so we're gonna start with introductions, and so I'm gonna go a little bit out of order of how this panel set up, mainly so that I can stage Kevin a little bit further to accommodate for any audio difficulties. But I want to start with Zach first. Zach, when were you here? What were you studying? What are you doing now?
Yes, so I was hello, my name's Zach. For those who don't know, was a student fall of 2018. Just graduated this past May of 22, or I guess last May. Now it's 2023. Um, I was the marketing director, as the position was called at the time, for OU Esports and OU Gaming Club, and majored in art, technology, and culture under the School of Fine Arts with a minor in communication. And I'm currently finishing up my graduate degree or master's degree in Toronto.
Awesome, thank you for that. That's great. Kevin, I'm gonna hold on a second. I'm gonna relinquish your mic control. There we go. And then do the same. Give me your intro. When were you here? What did you study? And what did you do in OU Esports?
Um, Hello, my name's Kevin. I used to be the vice president back in 2020. I played League of Legends for the team for like a year or two, and I studied biomedical engineering in college. I graduated in 2020, and now I'm a biomedical engineer at the VA hospital.
That's awesome. As a veteran that has plenty of peers that rely on VA resources, I love that we had a student champion that went and supported something that may not have been intentional, but absolutely means a lot to me with my background. So we're gonna move over to Anita, and Anita, as an introduction, the biggest thing to frame Anita here is that she was not involved in the startup of this or leadership, but has a pretty significant and impactful part now after learning about us. So, when were you here? What were you studying? And why did you get involved? And then, what are you doing right now with us?
Yeah, so I moved to Oklahoma for my graduate program at OU in 2017. I started my PhD in biochem and then through some kind of experimental moments, decided to pivot my entire career. So ultimately, I graduated with an MBA out of the Price College of Business. And in 2019, I first discovered OU Esports and really fell in love with kind of the greater mission and bigger kind of approach to esports. From then on, I started attending some of the events, including back to school and end of year. And I just saw the direct impact that these programs are starting to have on students, including the ones that are also joining me on call today. I decided that, it was something that I wanted to see through and contribute to.
Awesome. As you all know, this is all my alumni are titans, whether they realize it or not. They go on and to become some amazing things, as many students at any universities do. But obviously, I'm biased. And each one of you I've shared different journeys with our involvement in gaming and esports that both center around gaming and esports, but also transcend it in a lot of ways. Whether it was an awkward I need a mentorship moment at 2 in the morning, or I wanted to go to a con and meet somebody before I was even involved, Zach, or randomly crossing paths with somebody who was attending that knew nothing about this development, and Anita, and then coming full circle and using gaming as the mechanism and the glue that made us become peers in another world, in a world where predominantly we probably would have never crossed paths before. And I think that truly represents the power of what gaming signifies as a cultural movement, in that it is truly welcoming of all parties, regardless of any kind of affiliation, alignments, definition of who you are as a person. All these things are welcome at this table. So before we dive into OU specific things, let's talk a little bit further about you guys as the individuals. And I'm gonna tack on to the last, and we'll go in order this time. So for Kevin, before your time at OU, obviously you mentioned League of Legends, and League of Legends players play League of Legends since they were born, basically. But was there anything else or what helped you get into gaming as the first kind of thing ever in childhood or in your upbringing?
Yeah. So my gaming history, way back like when I was like 12 or something, my cousins introduced me to RuneScape, and so I played that for a significant amount of time before my parents didn't want to pay for the membership anymore. So then I tried to find some like more free games, such as like this Korean MMO called Lunia way back when,
Yeah.
and then that one died out. And so my friends were trying to find something to play online together. We found League back in like season 2, and a year later they all quit, but I got addicted, and now I'm still playing this freaking League of Legends. But yeah, I don't play it as much, but I do play stuff like Genshin, Final Fantasy 14, and what else? Persona now. So
Awesome.
those are
Awesome.
pretty fun.
Well, thank you for that. So that the entire community on Twitch can judge you, what do you main right now in League?
I'm a support main. Play only Lux, and I cry if I don't get it.
Only Lux. See, another common ground. I don't play a League that often anymore, but Lux is my main. Is my go-to, and then Riven after that, if I want to pretend to be aggressive. Cool. Anita, give us some history. What has gaming done for you, meant to you, or your exposure in your youth?
Yeah, so I actually wrote an article, probably my one and only article with OU Esports, talking about the fact that I'm a self-declared non-gamer, which recently has changed because I started playing Hogwarts. But growing up, gaming was something that all of my friends did, and it was such a fun way for me to just be the person who watched and cheered. And if you know me now, that's literally what I still do. I jump into streams with all of our OU esports teams, and I'm always just cheering them on and being supportive. But I have learned that gaming is a great way to bring people from different backgrounds together on a common ground. And that's one of the reasons why I was able to kind of change and shift my own mindset from what I had been traditionally kind of taught through experiences of gaming experience to what I see it as now.
Awesome. Thank you. Zach, what's that history look like?
Yeah, so I've been playing games as long as I can remember. Earliest memories are playing like F-Zero GX and Super Monkey Ball on like my purple GameCube, and then Legend of Zelda on my dad's like Game Boy Micro, I think is what it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And then just grew up with Nintendo, moved on to Xbox, PC, and then now PS5 and PC. So I've kind of been a little bit of everywhere. Um, but yeah, it's been a big part of my life for as long as I can remember.
Awesome. For me, I you'll see a red Crimson Mega Man behind me, and just to also be involved in this conversation. Usually, it's obviously the Blue Bomber, or known as Rockman in Japan. And for me, Mega Man was this cool way of teaching you how to play a game. Because in the intro scenes of a lot of the Mega Mans, they'd show you that you could charge up his Mega Blaster and do that, but then they didn't tell you how, and so you kind of explored how to do this. And so it was through a visual kind of context of showing you that something can be done, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Figure it out, which really inspires a lot of critical thought in gamers today, and may not appreciate it or look back at it, but gaming is such an educational component for a lot of us, on top of the potential sanctuary for some people, or an escape, or entertainment, or a job. And so the other portion that I love about Mega Man is that it was my introduction into EDM. It's literally 8-bit techno in a lot of ways, and has a lot of electronic music, and a lot of the ways that they compose that music, especially in those first 3 Mega Mans, was just iconic and so progressive, especially for just an 8-bit MIDI catalog of sound, which really defines an entire a entire genre of music still today, in chiptune and synthwave, and even a lot of anything that uses electronic instrumentation. So I appreciate you guys sharing a little bit of context and vulnerability there, but let's talk about OU Gaming Club and OU Esports, or let's actually go through the entire timeline. Esports Association at OU, into the OU Esports Club, into now the split of the Department of Esports and Co-Curricular Innovation, who now sponsors the very org that birthed it, now rebranded as the OU Gaming Club. Kevin, what was one of your most memorable or favorite memories of your time with us?
Oh yeah, some of my favorite memories. There was one time it was, I forget what it's called, where like all the OU groups go out and do community
Oh, you
service.
Giving Day. That was just recently, yeah.
Yeah, Giving Day.
Or not
Yes,
Giving Day. It was
exactly.
a big event. Big event.
Big event. Sorry, wrong thing. But in big event, there we went to go to I think elementary school,
Yes.
and we just helped like renovate the school so that it didn't look so run down and stuff. And then immediately after, we went to go get boba, and you did a giveaway for a keyboard, and I won. That
That's
was my
right.
most favorite moment, and I still have that keyboard and still use it to this day.
That's awesome. No, that's actually a really good memory. And I'm actually glad that you reminded me of it, mainly because we only done big event twice. And despite being the biggest student org, it's one of those things that I make intention to do other philanthropic initiatives, mainly because the second year that we did that was supporting a church. And we had some cultural problems with that just because of our diversity. And I made a very clear delineation because of the fact that students were taking my lead on this and trusting me to guide people, but at the same point, it needed to be reciprocated and saying this isn't quite sensitive to our demographic in regards we want to support, we want to contribute, but we want to make sure that it's also conducive to the things that would truly align and the things that we would support as a culture, community, and individual level. And so that also inspired us to start looking at different ways of how can we do philanthropic contributions, where maybe that school was perfect. I would do that every year without question. Supporting youth programs, supporting public schools especially, or anything that is supporting anybody in the realm of children who might be at risk youth or victims of domestic violence or in socioeconomic barrier situations. Those are the things that will absolutely make me respond in kind instantly without hesitation. But in the future, and as a byproduct of that, and really trying to make sure that we instill those values, we started doing, Bedlam and OU Texas, our Red River Clash, with a philanthropic initiative focused around the Children's Miracle Network to keep money in our own in our own communities, especially as a state public university. Because the time when we departmentalized, we would already have that culture and already have that intent, which would be even more strict, at least from my seat, of what I would want to support out of something that is fully sanctioned at OU. But it is also sponsored. This is a great segue. Oculus was in chat, but I think he collapsed and passed away from being on stream all this morning or something. But we are now about to announce a partnership with the OU Children's Hospital, where we go every other Thursday to play games with kids that are currently in their care, regardless of if they're terminal or temporarily there or things like this. And we'll be looking at doing all kinds of different programming. And then we're going to eventually open this up to alum as just something else to do if you guys want to, or anybody that's involved in our programs. Maybe it's that time of year and you just have the extra hours, and it's a really cool way of giving back without really costing anything. And it's just seeing a younger version of yourself in someone, which is truly kind of the full circle of the act of service. So I appreciate that memory. That's a really good one, and I hadn't thought about it specifically because it had been overshadowed by the year after that with the church. So appreciate that. Anita,
Hi.
what's a good memory so far that you've had with us? It's been you said 2019, so that's a pretty healthy timeline. What has been a memorable event for you?
Oh my gosh, 4 years, so many great memories. I would say it's probably the second back to school event that I went to, and I think it was the one last year. And it was the first time that I had actually participated as a volunteer, and I was at the checkout or check-in station. And I just remember seeing like groups and groups of freshmen coming through, super shy, were really timid, didn't want to talk to anyone. But the leadership team were amazing, and they went and just asked them questions about themselves and really made them feel like they could just be themselves. And quickly, like by the end of the night, everyone was mingling and playing games. And some of the people I went to go talk to were saying, like, I think I found my family here. And that is such a special moment as a freshman. I mean, it's been so long for me now, over a decade, but I do remember that first freshman experience of just being overwhelmed and having that homesickness. So I think the community has done a really good job of embracing everybody and creating an opportunity for others to come and feel like they can be included.
And that's one of the things that I appreciate. That's absolutely a great memory. That was the year after the major COVID impacts, and we were starting to ease back into campus, and so it's past Kevin's time, and this was Zach's kind of conclusion. And so it's really kind of sad because Kevin didn't get to experience that fully. But the magnitude of that event had over 400 attendees over the weekend, and we gave away close to $4,500 in sponsorship and fed everybody, and we put it in the black box in the DIY space in Cross, which was very controversial at the time when you were in leadership, because hey, we're designing this cool space, by the way, you can't use it. Oh, you can, and then you can't. Oh, you can, and then you pay for it. Oh, now you can't. And then OU eventually bought it last spring, and so now we can, and as we continue to build our own venue. But that moment is back to school is probably my favorite time. I'm utterly exhausted. I sleep amazingly the next day, but it is literally that experience of what Anita shared, being kind of culturally separated from it at the time of her exposure, to not understand the magnitude of just how intimately connected to gaming is for a lot of people. Even if they don't value it or define it that way, it is absolutely one of those sanctuaries that a lot of us might take for granted. And for those that don't, maximize their opportunities, which is really what this panel represents, of those that understood that they could do more with it. And it gave them something. Even if it still defines them or doesn't define them anymore, in that moment of time of their life, it mattered a lot. So cool. Zach, what was one of your favorite memories?
Yes. I've been thinking about this. I think I'm gonna have to go with traveling to OP Live
Oh,
my
wow.
freshman year. Yeah.
Early.
It was
Cali
like
era.
end of September. Yeah, we traveled down to Dallas for the Overwatch tournament, and just seeing, being so new to esports and college, and seeing just how many opportunities that were available to me even at such an early stage. It was really cool opening my eyes, and then on top of that, being part of the first iteration of OUXP as well, and hearing all the stories from leadership at the time, and everything. So
No, that's great, and I'm gonna reveal something, because I love this story too. And Zach is probably the hint of what was to come after. Yeah, Kevin's like, oh, here's the Moog speeches. I can see it in his face. I know that Kevin's face, and it's also comforting to see Kevin do that. But Zach was one of the very first students that approached us prior to us even truly kind of being formalized in that 2017 era, when we were just kind of figuring out where did we want to start, and we had maybe 5% of the answers at that time. And I still say that we're maybe at 50% of the answers at best. But right in the beginning of that 2018 year, when we eventually formed the organization, or no, 2019 was it? What was PAC South? What year was that?
PAC South, it was 2018 because it was
Yeah,
in
it was
January.
18.
Yeah.
So Zach had reached out to this newly founded Instagram that had this logo on it, and said, "Hey, I'm going to be at PAC South too. Can we link up?" And at this time, there was a student organizational kind of entity as an extension of Blizzard, or it wasn't quite Blizzard, it was coming Blizzard at the time, that was called TESPA. And they had organized a meet and greet at PAC South. And so I got to meet other student leadership at the time from like UCLA, as well as North Texas. And so it was kind of a cool experience. But here comes this, not even freshman, high school senior that said, I'm coming to OU. I want to meet you guys. And with me was also the founding president, Jack Counts, and the founding community director at the time, which would now be community coordinator, Callie Simonton. And we got to meet Zach, and I'll never forget this because I always reference it every time I think about this memory, is that Zach's dad grilled me so hard about, why is this a thing? Prove that it's of value to me. And it set a tone of me really trying to figure out how to develop my own skill set against the dark arts, as I'd call it, in regards to how do I defend this against parents that are objective, disagreements, or strategic stakeholders in the university that are going to absolutely have things to say, or even as polarizing and as problematic as what's currently happened in Tennessee and those things when it comes to gun violence in video games, potentially, or in youth programs and that stuff. And it does go that far. That's where my brain went back then, and it still is today. But he grilled me to the point where I couldn't answer questions, and I did not like that. I do not like being able to say I don't know without having at least a referral to somebody who does. And it showed, it gave me a piece of humble pie very early on about not allowing myself to have much of a chip on my shoulder, and making sure that student voices were going to be equal to mine as much as possible. And then eventually student voices will only amplify mine, not speaking on behalf of them in the context of, I know what's best for them, but more in the context of, this is what they want, here's the compromise, let's present it, we're all in agreement to move this plan forward. Now, in that same vein of meeting students prior to coming to OU, we're partnered with the Department of Admissions and Recruitment, which Zach was a tour guide of as well. And I think a big portion of that also had to be part of the impact you made in that regard. But we get referrals from OAR, at least it's been averaging about 1 to 2 every week, to schedule throughout these weeks. And I gave a tour to Heritage Hall this week. We had students from Tahlequah earlier this year in eastern Oklahoma. And then we've had students that have come over from all over the U.S. that make it a point to mention that esports is a topic of and gaming culture is a topic that they want to learn more about during their tour. And they strategically not only schedule a window, but they also cart them down all the way to Cross so that we can talk through it and meet face to face as part of the university experience of the first introduction of saying, hi, this is the Sooner Nation, welcome. So I appreciate that. That's excellent. So this one is going to be a little bit more involved because you're going to have to think a little bit as you answer it. So Kevin's already like, oh, there it is. And so I'll go in reverse order this time. So that way Kevin can think about it a little bit as courtesy. So I'll start with Zach. The question is basically, what are your thoughts on the current state in regards to where we're at now, where you left us, what you've seen in the updates? And granted, I know that not everybody should be following OU esports news once you graduate. I'm not relying on that. I'm more relying on where you left it. What were the problems that we had at that moment that you wish would overcome? So I can either tell you that it has been overcome or what's the current state on it. And then we'll follow it up at the end with where do you want it to go? So let's talk about current state, the challenges at your time here, and then I can give status updates on it, or it can refresh my memory because maybe I forgot. So Zach.
Yeah, I like to say I was fortunate enough to be, a student and be involved during like a drastic period of change. Going from Esports Association at OU to the Esports Club to then that split the summer before my senior year. But the biggest issue that I guess I saw, when I was nearing my end of time as an undergrad was what's the word? Like prospective students or recruitment. And I know I've seen you all been working on that, but I remember we had students like who were interested from what's like Switzerland and like out of country, basically. And so seeing that at such an early age, it was like, oh, that's so cool, but there weren't enough resources. I don't know now, but there weren't enough resources at the time to be like, hey, we're the best option right now. Like we can give you all this, this, and this. And I know we're raising money to provide students with those opportunities. So I'm really glad to see it continue in that way.
Yeah, and I just realized that your entire Overwatch squad of current Renaissance is in stream or portions of it. And if they're not, they should all be, because I'm going to give some Overwatch history here as a moment to reflect on how that portion of what we've done has come up. But no, this is important. This is the purpose of OU Giving Day today, is to raise it so that we can. And I know Thumper, Coach Thumper, the head of Overwatch right now, is currently in chat. And one of our biggest pressure points, and honestly, not necessarily like arguments or problematic conversations, but it is a constant pressure conversation, is the resources to arm coaches and leads to eventually go and have more effective recruitment. In the single year and a half and that we have, or a year since your time here, the landscape of collegiate recruitment and the topic of esports has become very, very much aggressive. Where you absolutely, because of the lack of rules on amateurism, like the athletic side, allows universities to recruit pros that are either retiring or past their prime in that. And I don't look at that to be an entirely bad problem, but it does need some regulation in some context or some scope. But it's hard to compete against, especially private universities who tend to be more agile because less bureaucracy and politics of not being a state agency are able to throw around things like full ride scholarships, room and board, and those types of things matter. I mean, the school is not cheap, and it seems to only be getting more expensive. And I want to make sure that we're doing our job to make it less expensive and incentivize the journey of, you got talents, you want to get an education, we have a program that meets all that. And so that we've hit, it was almost like 2 years ago where we started to see the glimpses of scholarships being thrown out across the board, whereas it's like, cool, well, there's a little bit of acceleration. They don't look that far ahead, But now you have schools that are literally recruiting entire teams as is. And I always joked, it's kind of hilarious because it's kind of irony and poetic justice on my board. But I was saying, hey, there's nothing stopping me going to Korea and recruiting an entire team from League of Legends. And it's true. Like, theoretically, it is absolutely true. But we're actually kind of not necessarily seeing that exact scenario, but the exact scenario where an entire team is getting recruited into college and given quite a bit of incentive. And so with OU being more focused on being SEC ready and being competitive in a lot of ways, this is now becoming a weak point. And that's where advocacy of a panel of perspective of people that live that life and struggled with those things, or understood those struggles, now are our biggest advocates of saying, it's not just Moog saying this. This is legitimately real. This is a challenge. And if you care so much about OU football and we're throwing money there, great. That's taken care of. It fuels a ton of athletics. And then you have these wonderful kind of rising stars and then some. And I don't mean it that they're just rising only, but like softball is a great example. Amazing program. And now, are absolutely, self-sustaining, cash flow positive, and no longer are having to probably, and this is me assuming, probably don't have to feed off of the predominant money funnel of a football program, which is amazing. Like, that's huge. But it required that football funding as a incubator to get going. So like that's kind of it is I often in my current like year, the phrase that I often say to administrators when they're trying to gain perspective on what's the current state, how do I really kind of gauge the value of current state versus other things I know, and I say, think of OU football in its first 20 years, which nobody can really kind of envision. The football stadium didn't exist yet. The money that's in the football didn't exist yet. This is what that is. It's history repeating itself, but it's very much those first couple of decades of a program like OU football before it became the titan that it is today and is multi-million-dollar bound with things like the SEC move. So, but yeah, very good point to bring up. And so this question is going to apply a little differently to Anita. So I'm going to skip you and come to Kevin. So the things that we left off in when you graduated, what were your pressure points, and what were the things that you wish you could have changed at that time?
I know at the time there was an issue with you like over promising sometimes.
Yeah, it's a good one.
That was I always kept you.
You did.
I kept the receipts basically saying anytime you promise something, I better see it in the future. So how's that going along so far?
So earlier today, I gave a director's kind of program update, and I toured the entire venue, like physically. I had a video recording and I toured it. And yeah, so one of the things that, and this was also me, this is a great lesson again for those that are either mentored by me or mentor me, and those that have moved on and now are coming back to ask this very question. You can imagine getting an opportunity like becoming a director of esports for a university like OU or a university, imagine like Notre Dame or UCLA or MIT or any of these positions where these brands are known and you just created a new industry within it. How excited you become and how eager you become. And it's fueled by passion, it's fueled by drive, and it's fueled by the idea that you want to make sure that students not only are satisfied, but they're happy and that they're, looking to the future. Now, there was a moment, plenty, and I won't downsize it. There was a quite a bit of window where I would take those initial conversations where somebody said, we could do this, as they said, you will do this, or you can do this, or it can happen. And I would translate that to people that would see it like a Kevin and not understanding the timeline to bring it to life. Now, the beauty of that at the very same point is that Kevin's continuous hounding of me and accountability also taught me how to have patience and temper excitement and return back to my very realistic ideology prior to this time of development. Because I don't think anything that we've talked about hasn't been in the pipeline of development still. The problem was timeline. And so in that venue, we're talking about a 40 PC lab. We're talking about iRacing VR. We're talking about dedicated offices. We're talking about dedicated dorms. That's all been past first rounds and approvals. And it's just a matter of now building it. So like getting the real estate approvals, those are big ones. Scholarships, obviously we enabled at the tail end of your time. And OU Giving Day now supplements and supports those things. So we talk about the stuff that we want to incentivize for students. Like imagine getting to a point where you're saying, hey, I want to come to OU. You have a coach like Thumper who says, I want this student. Their grades are good. Their competition or their skill in game is good. They're a good cultural fit for a coach for that team. I want to offer them a scholarship. Well, their academics are good. OU gives them a scholarship. The department of learning that they're going to go to gives them a scholarship. We give them a scholarship. We also have dedicated flooring, dedicated venue for development. summer camps, other things for them to do, and starting to bring in these things. All of that stuff is well past its first round and now in executing in some form or fashion. So I looked at that point of time, and I'll be completely transparent, as very infuriating and very frustrating. Because what Kevin and students in leadership that ultimately helped me grow the most taught me was that I got to stay humble if I want to get this going and learn how to be aggressive to the right audiences, which is not my students. It is to the stakeholders. It is to those that can grant and gain favor and sign off on things and approve things, and understanding how to strategically word that type of stuff was all part of my growing process, and the perfect example of how I learn from students just as much as I mentor students in real time. And I still attribute the fact that I'm at 41 years old with no gray hairs yet, knock on wood. Although I wish I would have some gray hairs, maybe look more a little distinguished. But at that point, I live off the vitality of youth and the younger generation to make sure that I still stay sensitive to what they care about on top of the business needs of what we do. What else, Kevin?
Oh yeah, the cool thing recently, I was interviewing a couple of people for positions at the hospital I work at, and like one person stood out because they were in the OU Esports club and they had a scholarship. So it was really cool to see like that finally come full circle, that scholarships exist for playing video games, and I, as an alumni, can sort of use that as leverage to try to push this person to be hired.
And Thumper, this is a heads up because this was a student under your purview. This was Nick Hoochin, to completely out him. So that was your first Overwatch roster that applied for a position where Kevin works. And so again, this is also a statement of why alumni are so critical to the lifeblood of this, not just in potential dollar contributions, but legitimately leveraging our networks to help in career placements and advisement, because the perspective for me is within the walls of OU with my experiences, but the perspective of someone like Anita, who is in a completely different industry, who has sensitivity to this, also has a completely different perspective. And that's what the value of subscribing to the method of how OU does education is, its value, versus subscribing to a smaller school, a bigger school, a private school, a D2, D3, and everything in between. The largest, biggest value is always the network. So it's really cool to see that full circle, and I appreciate you sharing that. But yeah, you got anything else to add to that?
Um, no, I think that's about it.
Okay, cool. All right, so for Anita, I'm gonna switch up this question a little bit because you weren't involved in leadership in regards to the current struggles, but and this can actually be the segue to kick off more about the future. So, as the external entity that did not come in from the sweating, the crying, the bleeding, the screaming of development of being in leadership from the ground floor, especially in Kevin's case, who was involved from the very beginning, or really close to the very beginning, and Zach, who came in hitting the ground running, starting an intercollegiate competition, and then eventually going into leadership, but also dabbling in streaming and having a pretty good macro perspective of internal organization. One, I would like you to share a little bit more about what you do as a living, and then apply that to where would you like to see a program like this go in the future?
That's a really great question, and I was hoping you'd ask it, so thank you. So I'm actually the managing director of an organization called Generator Oklahoma City. And without getting too in depth into it, basically I look for the best startup companies in Oklahoma, and I put them through a rigorous 12-week program to get them ready for investments in the venture capital world. So the way I come at esports right now is really from a business mind like perspective, right? So the way I would explain it is like you guys have done a really amazing job at growing from 0 to 1. You've grown your pipeline of students from less than 2,000 when I first joined to over 3,200 now as we stand. And that's incredible amounts of growth. But with kind of high growth, you also need to balance it out with those resources. So I'm coming in and really trying to focus on how we can safely and strategically be intentional about these sponsorships, monetization abilities, and then just making sure that as we continue to grow, we're not growing too fast and not having the right support.
And that last portion of there is also the other lesson learned. When we first started, and Kevin can speak to this, and Zach to some extent there as well. When we first created the Discord for day one, and everyone came into it, we immediately jumped to like 70 people, 70 versus 3,200 today. And at 70, it was just like, oh Lord, what did we do? Because at that point, we had this. We started. That was the timeline that started evolving a way that people communicated for a formally sanctioned development that wanted to do more. So, pure dank memes and, types of things like that would have to be subdued and not only suppressed, but evolved. As we knew that, at least from my seat, the goal was to get to a point of departmentalization. And if we just took gamer culture unfiltered, never, it would just never, it would just never happen. And so that scaling up, I think organically happened at about a plus 600 per year, which was, I think, a pretty good, healthy increase. And then COVID happens, which is right after your time, and it jumps 1,000 to 1,200 in 2021, or in fall 2021 or 2020. And it was surreal because now we had a new challenge. Instead of people absolutely being attentive and looking for updates, to you have to try and keep the attention of 3,000 people. And this is definitely a big weakness for us that we are actively looking at and reviewing. And so it continues to be that challenge, but that scaling up is exactly what I was hoping wouldn't happen too fast. Ultimately, this Discord will be over 10,000 members in 3 years, 4 years. It's pretty easy to see as we get more campus partners and more penetration, or the collective of all of our Discord communities that we eventually spawn. Whether it's the development side, gaming club, I still don't know how we're going to do the venue when it finally becomes functional. If that's going to be separate or integrated. So those are all challenges of managing a ton, which then relies more on the Zach side of things as a marketeer, and the current Joey Jacob collaboration as far as the community coordinators, and how do we control that narrative? How do we control the communication flow so that we can make sure that the information that's needed is in the right places, as many places as possible, and in the right audiences, and then at least being able to direct correctly to those things. So absolutely valid. And so I'm going to come back to Zach now, and let's talk about the future. Knowing that we already put the bookmark where you did, what do you want to see for the future? Like the stuff that you haven't talked about.
Definitely the venue.
Man,
Yeah, as I
Yes,
feel like most of us do.
yeah.
But also, more scholarships, more out-of-state students. I know there's been times, at least from what I've seen, where we've really wanted to recruit a student, and the student's been was really interested to come to OU, but it just wasn't able to happen, due to economic situations and scholarships we were able to offer and things like that. So I think making that more accessible, or as accessible as it can be, and then on top of the venue, full-time positions too, because I feel like it'll start growing even faster once we're able to
Delegate
hit
off
that
my
mark.
plate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which actually, again, if people, and I don't expect that you guys were, but during the leadership, the director's update panel 3 hours ago, I did reveal that this was the first year that I actually had a student employee, and then this next year I will actually have 2 GAs. And so that is starting again, delivering on those promises that weren't delivered in the same timeline that was initially expected out of Kevin's wheelhouse, but it's still an execution. And so getting GAs is a big deal, because that is the start of the delegation off my plate to have specific focuses, which means that student vacancy or that student position right now becomes vacant. So now I actually could potentially have 3. But then all these fundraising campaigns at one giving day kind of kicks off the energy for us. But on Sunday, Overwatch team will also be kicking off their first individual focused fundraiser within our development. So the best way to make this relatable for those that don't quite understand what that means is, when you look at OU Athletics doesn't typically fundraise as OU Athletics. They typically fundraise as OU football, OU softball, OU baseball, OU basketball, and so on. And for us, we haven't been strong enough to the point where you would want to split League of Legends from Overwatch, from Call of Duty, from everything else. And now I think we have our first examples of being strong enough to start that split, which also means that the split in marketing, the split in community engagement also needs to follow suit, and eventually the splitting of social channels. Because some people will be like, yeah, I love gaming and esports, but I specifically only want COD content. So I don't go to OU football to find softball stuff. That's kind of that same mentality. So that time is now getting set up to become the start of the next chapter of evolution, and us kind of almost throwing away at least 75% of that 1.0 policy document when it comes to the intercollegiate component and how it interacts with the rest of it. So providing more synergy, more cohesiveness, and the ability of saying, yes, we know at the front face when we talk about esports, we're talking about the teams that compete on a high stage. Even though we know that at the core, you have to have production, you have to have logistics and event planning, you have to have these things to make it come to life. And so now flips the switch of saying, all right, we have enough students that understand this assignment, and we can now leverage that properly to fortify teams to getting to a point of being able to be marketable on their own through us, because we as the organization are bringing the licensing to the table, the keys to the venue, the keys to dorm spaces, the keys to being able to issue scholarships and having campus partners, which now means that we'll start to look closer and closer to a lot of the business processes of an athletics division as far as business back end, while we still stay true and sensitive to the nature of gaming being inclusive for everyone. And so that stuff doesn't happen quickly. And that was ultimately the lesson learned, going back to what Kevin brought up in regards to promising things. And ultimately it came up and saying, no, I don't want to be somebody who doesn't deliver. But unfortunately, the timelines are the problem that needs to be readjusted in those statements. That's it. Because I don't think there was anything I said that in the past, and maybe there's one or two, I'm sure Kevin will pull those receipts if I really challenge him, which I'm not. Where it's one of those things where it's like the things that either evolved from the original statement of promise or intent have evolved in a better way, or a more inclusive way, or a more encompassing and canvassing way. So for Kevin, for the future, what would you like to see from a program like this, or something to be involved in?
For the future, I'm not sure, but like I had this really cringe thought of like I saw Nicholas's application on my desk, so it's like this is amazing. I wish I could like help promote that and just like try to like teach stuff like that. I don't know. I didn't really attend a lot of career development things when I was at school, such as like how to interview, making your resume better, and stuff like that. I kind of just learned it on my own. But after seeing his interview and yeah, after seeing his interview, there's a lot of tips I can give as someone who's working to help like push them further in their career progression.
So this is actually a perfect segue, as Anita just gave you two a call to action in chat on Twitch to say link up with me afterwards. Our Coach Thumper on Overwatch, and I keep referencing Overwatch because it is kind of my most developed infrastructure competitive team. And one of the things that they do as a team from his leadership is doing personal development programming in their weekly stuff, throughout the school year. And one of the things that they do is like interview night and resume overview. And this is exactly the thing that you just wish you said you could do, Kevin. So the idea is that eventually we want to have a pool of alumni that can contribute. And what I don't like doing is asking people for money. I'm still weak at that, even though I need to be more aggressive at it. But
It's okay, you have me.
but at the same point, I'm also really sensitive to, even if I was to a point of asking for people's money, I'm not interested in really asking alumni until they're closer to 30 and well into their careers, into their early 30s and on. However, in that 20-year window, that's where these experiences where you still are closer generationally to the students that are in attendance, and those first rounds of life lessons that you're getting are truly important, and you can't put a dollar amount on. And those are the things that absolutely are opportunities in this. Oh no, are opportunities in this that we can absolutely entertain as a means to say, hey, alum, you want to contribute? You can contribute in this way. But just know that will be a resource, and it would be something that I would call to action in the next school year. As I'm sorry for the feedback of notifications on my Win computer. In the next year of saying, all right, alum, for those that I reference in that, especially the leadership pools, anybody willing to come back and let's talk about perspective and see if we can do some career development. And so that's perfect. That's a perfect segue in that regard to be able to contribute. So that's absolutely here and will be a thing. So, oh no, my camera died. Look at that. Technical difficulties. That's fun. That's fun. Moog doesn't exist anymore. We're just going to leave it like that. That's perfect. North American stream standards, right? Okay, cool. I'm back. All right, so we're getting close to the last 15 minutes of this, and really just kind of want to consume a couple more minutes and then kind of end this early. Is I think that there's plenty of good context and perspective, especially because these panels are yes, they're aimed at obviously students that are currently in program, but not necessarily entirely. These are also statements that I will be using as a means to share with other alumni or prospective businesses to understand that there is a lifeblood coming out of it, that there is people that are either extending their education in Zach's journey or going into the workforce in Kevin's journey or going down the path of entrepreneurship with Anita. And that shows a diversity of intent of maybe if it not necessarily being directly aligned with career placements and things like this coming out of us, but it is something that absolutely impacted your trajectory of eventually finding your place or being closer to finding your place. And I can reference these conversations with all three of you. And I think Kevin was the most prominent one. Jesus, this camera. I'm just going to leave it there. Mike is just black screen for now. But I can reference this in a conversation with Kevin, and you were applying for these jobs, and we were going back and forth of how to get prepared and to have conversations, and there was stress, there was anxiety, but at the same point, I think that there was some clarity in saying, yeah, you don't know, and you have to face the challenge, and until you do, you're not gonna overcome this. And then once you did, you said, okay, now I'm getting more comfortable. As we started this before the call, of getting more comfortable and more confident in my position, and that's the hope for any parent, mentor, teacher, or peer in their networks, because I know that every single one of you, regardless of your relationships with parents or significant others or mentors in that same vein, we all worry about those that we have impacts on or that we have some influence over. And at the end of the day, we just want to worry less so that we can celebrate more. And that's what alumni truly signify of what I hope for them, regardless of what thing you're involved in with us, what level or an extent, if it's just as much as a lurker in the gaming club that at least makes the effort to make a connection all the way to the formidable tip of the spear in leadership. That's what I wish for everyone. And so thank you guys for coming. But for my Overwatch team that's in the ranks, and so Kevin, you're done. You can just relax a little bit, and Anita can relax a little bit, and Zach as well. But I'm going to talk about OP Live a little bit because I didn't double down on that, and I want to share it because it was probably one of my most memorable journeys early on too. But then it became kind of my biggest kind of Achilles tendon as, again, Thumper and I kind of went to at each other in regards to getting past OP Live. So in the very first year of development, our Overwatch team, which was also at the time prior to the current leadership structure of Overwatch, was also probably one of our most active developments. We had a leadership who was in charge of it. That was Callie as well, who was top 500 Mercy back then, and started our journey with us as a junior, I think, and was also involved in being a community coordinator, the evolution of what the community coordinator is today. And we got invited to basically the equivalency of Battle for Texas. So before it was Collegiate Battle for Texas, it was called OP Live, and it was put on by the Dallas Fuel. And so we went down to at a convention center, and I forget which one it is. Zach, do you remember? It's in Irving. I don't. Yeah, it was in Irving.
Yeah.
And so at the time, Dallas Fuel was there. They had their merch shop. We had some of the original, we had like a Reinhardt cosplayer in full armor there. It was really cool. And they had different exhibitions. SMU's game Guild Hall was there, which was a game development extension of SMU. Were all present. So it was a really hyped event. And so out of the 16 teams that was involved in this invitational, only 2 were not from Texas. And that was us and 1 from Colorado. And at the time, because again, this was very infantile as far as even more so than it is now, we got all the way to grand finals. And the hilarity of it is that it was UNT that was our rival in the very beginning, North Texas and Denton, which ironically, and you can draw your own assumptions, was founded the same year OU was founded. So you can just see somebody had a disagreement and hopped over the border and founded UNT, because Denton is really close to the border. But anyway, we went down to OP Live. It was the first time that I went and I rented out a van, and we took the entire team down for a single day. It was extremely exhausting. I also kind of wrecked that van, legitimately actually damaged that van. As I was parking in, I didn't understand the height, and I drove it right into a wedge inside of a parking garage. Thankfully, I bought insurance, so I backed it out with a nice little dimple on its head, and that was that. And thankfully, that insurance did its job, because I sure parked at Enterprise the next day and said, "My bad. But it was literally that the entire of one of those fleet vans, and the entire head was just crushed in. Drove it all the way home that way. I just didn't care. It's like, ooh. Yeah, but got there safely, got home safely. Nobody was in the van when I. Oh no, they were. Everybody was in the van when that happened. It said, crunch, crunch, crunch. But that was the first time that I revealed that at least there was a T-shirt, and so everybody in the Overwatch team looked uniform at that time, as they ushered in this next chapter early on in our generation of development. But so forth. But we got all the way to grand finals. The hilarity of this and the irony and the bittersweet nature of it is, it's gonna make me emotional. Jeez, I'm gonna stop that. But we pretty much get all the way to grand finals. I think we were undefeated all the way to the final. But we played UNT in the second round and decimated them. At this time, it was almost we had a pretty aggressive DPS that was on that front line, and we were dominating with just using Doomfist extensively. Like, there was no meta. It was just throw Doomfist in there, and if you could do it fast enough, you could just be done. Not that I haven't seen that much variation in a lot of ways from it today, but it was way just dumber then. But then we got to grand finals in UNT, and it came down to, it was an epic, emotionally dramatic battle. And stupid camera. But we end up losing in grand finals to UNT after going undefeated for all games to get to that point. But one of the most significant, and I'm probably glad the camera's not off as my face is starting to swell up a bit. But we get to that final point, and in that moment of defeat, in that very second of defeat, from a coach, potential, parent figure, mentor, adult, more adult in that space, every single face on that stage wore that face of defeat. And that was probably one of the best lessons ever. If you've never faced defeat firsthand, facing it in the highest spectrum of a tournament is probably one of the most, it's just humbling. And at the time, Overwatch at that current roster definitely had some egos on it. Not even close to what Overwatch has matured into today. And it put a lot of them in their place. It also caused a lot of them to start separating because they didn't like losing. Which, again, if you're building a program that is going to be legacy focused and building for the future and stands the test of time, the egos have to stay in check. But literally 3 seconds later, after you see the long faces kind of realize what just happened, OU's Overwatch team stands up and claps for UNT. And they immediately go over and shake their hands. And the owner, or the chief operating officer of Team Envy, who is an Oklahoma State alum, walks over to me, hands me his card, and he says, "Whatever you're doing at OU, don't stop." I have never seen that, ever. I've never seen a team lose, stand up, and cheer. They all, again, we suck at handling defeat sometimes, but this is what I meant about setting the mandate for competitive teams about you will win and lose as a team. Because at the end of the day, win or lose, life's going to go on, and you can't allow some singular event to define you. And so that was one of the best lessons and best memories of that, and why OP Live was significant on top of the physical trip and Overwatch history. But it was also a defining moment of how I was going to structure from my seat and mandate competitive teams to behave from that point forward. Because if I have a COO of a professional team who's still here today telling us that and literally handing me his business card, then that's a pretty significant statement that we were on the right path in something. So on that note, I'm going to try and turn my camera back on one last time just so I can sign off. Hey, and
I'm gonna interrupt you real fast, just because I don't think I answered the question earlier of what I wanted to see for the future of OU Esports. So as I'm kind of in the process of kind of helping to build out the future, one of the biggest things outside of course, the venue is really creating that pipeline of opportunities for students post-program. And I know a lot of students have been just randomly DMing me to get that advice, but a lot of it comes down to alumni coming together and building a coalition almost to kind of provide those support, like interview help, resume reviews, connections to your own network. So you guys will see a call to action for me in the next few months to do so.
On that note, any final statements that you guys want to make? Kevin, I'll start with you. Anything you want to say?
I just forgot to mention in the very first question my gaming history. I played Pokemon. That's where I got my username from.
You
I
act
just
like there's
completely flew over my head.
yeah, I was like, what? And then as you're sitting as your IGN is literally under your name on stream, but yet we have
Yeah.
not seen a single plushie on stream.
What? You could.
I can't.
Do you want me to bring the big one on? Let me go grab
Might as
it.
well show them why you have your name.
3 feet tall. It's huge. Gigantic.
There you go.
That's my favorite.
You should have just put that on camera and just talked off camera. You could have done
This
that.
is my
That's
this
your
is mine.
YouTube.
Yes, this is mine.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, great.
My favorite.
Anita, any closing statements?
Yeah, one of the best advice I give to students is to just tell your story. Like wherever you go, whoever you talk to, tell your story. Talk about your passions for esports, whether it's OU or not. The more the people that hear it, the less stigmatized it's going to be, and the more questions they're going to ask, the more they're going to get involved. And the only way we're going to be able to grow this organization organically is if you guys all go out there and talk about it too.
Yep. And Zach, closing statements.
Boomer sooner.
Well, and to be quite frank, of all the people on this panel, Zach is eager for any job postings to come back. I know it for a fact. And so that day will eventually come, I'm sure. But again, in the spirit of Kevin keeping me accountable, it's not quite here yet, but it is in the works. So on that note, I'm going to close out the alumni panel. Thank you all for your time today. And I appreciate you contributing in this way, and then look for future opportunities to contribute, as well as other development and updates, as always, as you guys are plugged in right into the heart of the Discord already. But this will be the year, finally, and I'm saying this with confidence, knowing Kevin's in the room, this will be the year where a lot of transformative things that are physically facing happen. Not just the structural infrastructure of approvals and policies and emails and black and white ink, but actual physical, tangible, visible things. This year will be defined by that. So look forward to that, and you guys stay safe. It was good to catch up with all of you, and have a good week.